It is good to be home. I got to tell you, I got on a plane in Los Angeles, California at the middle of this week as I was coming back. I texted my mom about 1 minute before we took off, and I said, Mom, just before we fly out of here, I just want to say I'm glad to be going back to the United States of America. Yes, California is way different than we are in every way. But I thank you first and foremost for allowing me to go be with my family during a time of loss. It was a tough week for us. My wife and children went to Michigan, where I'd intended to go to be there for my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary. But as many of you know, my grandfather, or grandmother, who was 90, passed away. I want to share more with that in our message. I want to just share with you some things that I see in her life as the mother of my mother. But I can't move forward in our service without at first thanking Matt. I see you shaking your head because you know I was going to thank you. But remember when you were in the youth group and I was your youth pastor, and you went up on the roof in the middle of the evening. You didn't go up. You weren't part of that roof team. There was this big sign that said, "Do not go on the roof." I don't mind embarrassing you once in a while. I want to thank you, and Donald, I want to thank you too for filling in. Not just admirably, but incredibly. Very, very thankful to both of you. I got a lot of text and phone calls saying how wonderful it is. It's very comforting as a pastor to know that when I go away that we have two such godly men to lead us and to guide us and direct us. I thank you for that. Now, it would be wrong of me not to mention to you another pastor in our midst. Ben, stand up. I wanted to introduce to you the newest staff member at First Baptist Church of Holt. He's coming on board this Thursday as an intern, and he'll be working mostly with our worship team, but also with our youth department. And we're excited to have him. Our hope and prayer is that he stays with us for a very long time. But I wanted to officially announce what we voted on as a church in our last business meeting, that Ben is coming on staff with us. So let's give God a hand for him. I'm just pointing at some of our college students that are back now. It's kind of exciting for me to see some of them. It's good to have you all back. And I look forward to what God's going to do through this summer with you. I do want to thank you, mothers, for being who you are. It is such a blessing for us to know and be reminded of your greatness. And this message, I am going to preach this passage, 1 Samuel chapter 1. You want to be turning now. I'm going to preach this passage one other time. It was my very first, not even official Sunday here. I preached this passage to you in view of a call. So I don't even remember when that was. I can tell you, Matt, when did you get married? Should I ask you that publicly? Let me ask Amy. It's probably safer. Yes, it was when I came back the weekend to do your wedding, and I preached. What's that? March of 2011. And I preached this passage, but I preached it in an entirely different way than we will today. It's the same meaning, but I think today we're going to highlight this young woman in here, this mother. But I wanted to share with you because I think it's interesting that we can see motherhood on many different levels. For instance, there was one mother who was walking with her 4-year-old daughter when her little girl picked something up on the road and began to put it in her mouth. Well, you mothers know what the response to that was, right? What did the mother do? Put that down, knocked it out of her hand and said, "Don't do that." Well, the daughter looked up at her and asked, "Why? Why?" To which the mother said, "Because it's been lying outside. You don't know where it's been. It's dirty. It probably has germs." So at this point, the daughter looked at the mother with admiration and asked, "Wow, how do you know all this stuff, Mom?" The mother quickly thought and said, "All moms know this stuff. It's on the mommy test. You have to know it or you cannot be a mommy." Well, the mother and her daughter walked for a few more minutes, and you can see the little girl was pondering something. So she gets it, and all of a sudden the little girl looks up at her mom and says, "Mommy, I get it." And the mom says, "What do you get?" She says, "I see if you don't pass the test, then you must become a daddy." The mother just smiled and replied, "Exactly." Well, Kind of who our mothers are. They rise above. They stand out, don't they? It was a blessing for me to be home. When I got there, California's not home for me. It's where my family has matriculated over the years because of job opportunities first and then family second. And my grandmother had written out so much for me to use in the funeral. I officiated my grandmother's funeral. My brother officiated my grandfather's funeral. So it was very special for our whole family. And I was very, very blessed. My grandmother received Jesus Christ late in her life, in her 70s. But her funeral wishes were consistent with everything that we know and understand God to be. I got to tell you, right up until the day she passed, let me just tell you how she went, because this is important for us Christians and important for you ladies, and it fits this message. She woke up the day of her passing. She got in her car and she drove herself to what she called the old folks' home at 90, and she ministered to them by playing piano and singing for them. She got back in her car and she went to have lunch with a friend. She went from there to the grocery store to buy a bunch of food for her closets and cabinets, because when people come over, she wanted to have their favorite. Each person, she would have their favorites. She laid it out on the counter as she always did. She sat down to rest for a few minutes, and she went to be with Jesus. Now I'm telling you, that's the way that we should go. Serve Him right up until the end. My grandmother didn't have a bucket list anymore. She was one of those incredible people. She was on TV, played piano with Liberace years and years ago. She was so talented. She could play by ear. Even losing her hearing 10 years ago, she still played beautifully. Everywhere that she went, she was always asked to play different things. And she really taught my mother how to mother. And I grew up in a wonderful home because of that. And so on Mother's Day, not only do I pay honor to my mom, but I pay honor to my grandmother who set the tone. But upon her funeral wishes, her entire funeral was about us knowing Jesus, her family, the legacy that would leave behind in her wake. And I just want you to keep that in mind, because this is, for you mothers, this is what this passage is about. So I want you to stand with me. Let's read together 1 Samuel chapter 1, starting verse 1. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim, Sophim, and the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, and the son of Tohu, and the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah and his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. It happened year after year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord, that she would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Heavenly Father, I pray that this passage would be a constant reminder to us, Lord, of just what it takes to be an incredible mother, to leave a legacy behind that would transform so many others. God, I pray that we would get that out of this passage today, what you have revealed and shown me yet again in this beautiful passage in your word. In Jesus' name we pray these things. Amen. Well, the first thing I want to point out is that, godly mothers still experience tough times. They still experience real problems. They still experience the battles that life is going to bring at us. Just because you have Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior does not give you an exemption to the problems that life brings about. We're going to have hurts, and we're going to have turmoils, we're going to have trials. But in those times, how we respond and how we hold on and how we walk through it with the Lord, those are going to define not who we are, but who He is in us. And so I want us to be about Him. And mothers, I just want to challenge you to be thinking about Hannah, because there's a lot of stuff in this passage. And I'll share some things that are also blessings. But I really want you to focus and listen in on Hannah. Because Hannah did what she knew best to do. And it changed the course, not just of her, but of an entire people group. I want you to think about that. That just because of her faithfulness as a mother to her child, it transformed the course of an entire people group. It's common to think also, these biblical characters had these awesome lives and they never had any negative things happen, but in the process of living, in the process of going on, God just chose them, dragged them out to be extra special. But that was not the case. In fact, she was more than ordinary. You see her bitterness over not being able to have children. You see the angst and the trouble that she would have received from someone picking on her. In this passage we read that she had her own bitterness that even her husband couldn't help her through at times. And you see these times are going to happen to us, but when they do, the question is, how will we rise up? How will we respond? So I want to go on to verse 9. I want to read through this passage a little bit more with you so that you can understand just who Hannah was. Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look upon the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. Now I want to share a few things about this verse. It's a powerful couple of verses. The first thing I want to tell you is, the second thing I see is that godly mothers will express fervent prayers. Notice that when Hannah was under the most stress, that moment at Shiloh, Hannah has found herself out of energy to battle the enemy, this other wife. Hannah has found herself out of energy to battle the circumstance of her life, not having children and the loss that must have brought. Hannah was tired, she was wore out, she was beaten down. But Hannah, in her deepest and troublingest times, did not sit at home feeling sorry for herself. Hannah got up and she went early in the morning to the temple to pray. The Bible records that Hannah, in the deepest part of her depression or the deepest troubles of her times, was at the foot of the cross. That she was at the temple crying out to the Lord saying, Lord God, if you'll give me this son, I will in turn raise him for your purpose. Now it's important what she said about no razor touching his face, because you know if you were going to be in the priestly line, you didn't cut your hair, you didn't shave. You got it. We don't get it. You get it. But yes, they did. They practiced this. And so what she was inevitably saying is, God, if you'll give me a son, I'll quickly in turn him back to you. I'm going to redirect him into ministry for you. And I'm going to do it for a lifetime. A blade will never touch his face, the Bible records. And so she was talking about dedicating her child to the Lord for a lifetime. Now I'll tell you, it's very easy, because I have lived this way before. It is very easy to find excuses why we don't bring ourselves, let alone our children, to church. But the reality is that if we don't bring our children to church, mothers, if you don't bring your kids to church, if you don't make church a commitment for you and your children, then you're going to suffer someday along your side, your children, because of it. My grandmother, 70 years old, is when she got saved, or thereabouts. Wonderful, wonderful woman. But I don't want you to think that the day she got saved, the family all got right. We have healing and bonding going on even still. God has done some incredible works. It was very healthy for us all to be together at her life celebration. It still was very tough. So if we don't do these things now, there will be consequences later. And I want you to understand that, because Hannah got it. She understood. She said, God, if you'll give me a child, I'm going to give him back to you. Let's move on into verse 12. Now it came about as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving. But her voice was not heard, so Eli thought she was drunk. And Eli said to her, "How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine." But Hannah replied, "No, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in the spirit." That means brokenhearted, depressed. Do we know that there's depression going on in our world today? Do we hear and see people that are broken in spirit? The enemy comes upon you and he doesn't just attack the one area. He will attack your entire life. The minute he begins to gain ground in a certain area of that life, he will charge through the door after you. And the reality is that the only way that you'll combat that situation, and this is mothers and fathers, and youth, and children, and anyone else that's in here today, the only way to combat the enemy attacks upon you is to turn your trust to Jesus and ask Him to be the one that stands before you in the face of the enemy. You will never have the power on your own to fight the enemy off. That is a fact. Hannah understood that. That's why she was at the temple in the deepest part of her depression. She had turned to the Lord. So Eli is talking to her and he says in verse 16, "Do not consider your maidservant," or she says, "Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman. For I have spoken until now of my great concern and provocation." And then Eli said, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you have asked of Him." And she said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Now, I think I shared with you this the last time I preached, but this terminology, sad, make her sad, is not the best translation. I think the best translation in the Hebrew kind of says that her face was downcast. Her face no longer, I should say, was downcast. As if to say, you see those people, you've seen them, maybe you've been them, when they're beaten up and they're just tired, they just walk around, their heads down. It's like it's just too much energy any longer to pick up your head. You're just so tired and you're being beaten so much. You're so wore out. Mothers, you've had those moments. I know I caused those moments for my mom. I've told you I was not a preacher when I was a teenager. I was not a good student like these young men here. I was a really troubled child, and I caused a lot of grief for my mom and dad. And for a couple of years during that time, it was very, very tough on them. Very tough. In that process, I can remember times when I would wake up in the middle of the night and find my mother kneeling at the bed, the foot of the bed that I was in, and crying out to God for my protection. The Bible says that after praying, that her face was no longer downcast. She was no longer sad. What I see is that when she left the temple of God after crying out to Him in prayer, the countenance of her face, the look she had in her eyes, it all had changed. Something about prayer transformed who she was. It must have been that way for my mother at the foot of my bed when I was a troubled teenager. It must have been that my mother went away from those prayer moments not only knowing that she had lifted me up, but knowing that she had been lifted up by God. See, when you stand in the presence of God and you cry out to Him like the Bible tells us to here, God changes who you are. He transforms us, and Hannah walked away no longer looking down, but looking up, looking forward, watching where she was going because she had a purpose. Why? Because Eli had spoke a word to her that God would not let her down. I don't know that that meant necessarily to her at that moment that she was going to have a child. It's easy looking at our perspective backwards to say, okay, well, she knew at that moment she was going to have a child. I'm not sure. I don't think this really fully tells us if that's exactly what is meant here. But either way, we see that this godly mother was expressing in her deepest and toughest times fervent prayer. So mothers, let me challenge you today, pray for your families constantly. It is my belief that my grandmother didn't just sit in a chair and relax. We called it her prayer chair. It was the place where she sat and watched the birds out the window. And she said often that she would find herself in that chair talking to God. And I would not be surprised for a moment if it was that she sat down in that chair and just began to cry out a list of things that she would like to see God do in her life that day. That's a wonderful, wonderful picture of what mothers must do. I know that when I got to California, the first thing my mother did is say, let's stop and let's pray together. I'm so grateful you're here. Prayer was the first thing on her mind. Well, that and the fact that her son was there. I think those two things, but I mean, it all kind of comes together, right? And so let's go on to verse 19, because I want to share with you the third thing I see in here, is that a godly mother will experience God's provision. Now, if you begin to pray, God is going to provide. I don't know that that always means that your child is instantly going to be... Now, I'm not telling you to go home today. If you've got a child who's having some tough times, you pray, and then that child is going to come back to you and go, hey, Mom, I get it now. You must have been praying for me. All's good. Let's go on. I don't think it's going to work like that, but what I think it's going to do is when you pray, God is going to begin the process of providing. It will end in glory. Verse 19, please. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord and returned again to their house in Ramah. Elkanah had relations with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And it came about in due time after Hannah had conceived that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. And God remembered her. What a beautiful answer that she had to her prayers. And I don't know exactly for you what you're going through, mothers, but I will tell you this, that anything you're going through can be given to God. And in giving it to God, whether it's sorrow or grief or distress or anger, whatever it is, if you'll give it to the Lord, God will begin the process that will bring provision for you in the way only God knows you need. I've known other women, godly women, who have prayed for years for God to provide them a child. And they did not. God did not. And so what they found is they found themselves in the form of adoption, bringing blessed children in their lives. But I'll tell you, God always provides in a way that we can't always understand. But God's provision always is better than we would have ever planned. Does that make sense? Oftentimes I've tried to chart the course of my life before the Lord. I want to have God redirect me in a far different way. And me all the while going, God, it would have been easier to go my way. And all the while Him saying, trust me. And then when I look back, I see that my way had curves and mountainous ranges. And the danger was ever present. And God's way was a sharp line right to the destination He had for me. We cannot second guess the Lord because He sees from a far better perspective than we do. Verse 21, the next point I see. Not only does a godly mother experience God's provision after a godly mother expresses fervent prayer, but the next thing I see is that a godly mother will see her calling through, just as my grandmother, for all those years, and even the day that she went to be with the Lord. She had talked so much recently about going to be with my grandfather, wanting to be again with him. When she passed and they found her just an hour or a bit more than that, her arm was out like this, as if she had been reaching out. Very cool moment. I have no regrets about my grandmother's life, by the way. I'm sad that she's gone. I have no more grandparents. But I am so excited that I will see her again. You know, Scripture says, for those who are in God, in Christ, that in heaven, one day, the Bible says it's like 1,000 elsewhere. For her, our reunion day as a family will be tomorrow. And that's how I choose to look at it. The perspective of God. Verse 21, then the man Elkanah went up with all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned, and then I will bring him that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Remain until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word." So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now, when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, although the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. Eli was the priest. She said, "O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord as long as he lives. He is dedicated to the Lord," and he worshiped the Lord there. So I want to share with you a couple things from this last section. The first thing is, when she saw this situation unfolding like it did, she didn't rush the case and take her baby directly up. Instead, the Bible says she weaned him. She took care of his nourishment first. She did that, and then when it was done, she took him up and she dedicated in the right and proper way her son, Samuel, to the Lord. She did it in a proper way in which God would be most blessed. The thing I see most of all here is that she did it. You know how easy it is to say in a crisis situation, "God, if you'll help me through this, I'll do this, this, and this." You don't have to raise your hands, but I see some of you nodding. Probably tells me that some of us in here have done that very thing. I just want to challenge you with this, mothers. Our kids and our families are very much too important to make false promises to God. Let's be consistent. Fathers, this is for us too. Let's be consistent. Let's not give up. Let's stay focused. Let's stay on course for God. God is doing such amazing things here in this community, in this church. We just look around. We're fighting to find chairs. It's a good thing. God is doing amazing works. There's going to be trials and tribulations. But God is continuing to bless. He'll do the same in your home. But in this situation, she takes her son Samuel up, and this had to be equally hard as hard. Imagine, mothers, she takes her son up to the priest, and she gives him to Eli. And then she leaves him there. After having all of that depression and sadness over not having a son, God gives her a son. She takes him and delivers him to the priest to be trained up in the priesthood. And then she trusts God with him. She just hand him over. Well, I don't think I understood that passage until just this last couple of weeks. My daughter having a small accident and my oldest son getting ready to go away to college. I realized that we're not too far away from giving them up to God. Trust in the whole night. Right here, Daddy can fix everything, or Mom can fix everything. When they go away to college, you're giving them up. I'm sure some of you college students experienced that when your parents were the first time you went away. It's probably a little easier now, I don't know. I'm just going through my first time. But I see this process more now than ever before. How tough it must be. Can I just tell you a few blessings? Now this I did share with you the first time, but it's such a wonderful roll call of what God does. First of all, I want to tell you, Charles Swindoll said, God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things so that His glory will be seen. He's not calling extraordinary people. He's calling ordinary people to do extraordinary things through the name and the power of God. Hannah was that. She was an ordinary person with lots of problems, lots of things. Her life wasn't easy. But when she trusted God, as she put her trust in God, God transformed a lot of things. Eli's sons were both killed in battle. Eli the priest. His sons were not raised and dedicated to the Lord. So his sons were killed, and so when that happened, he put all his energies into Samuel. Samuel became the priest who would replace Eli, the priest over God's chosen people. Ichabod was the name of one of Eli's sons, by the way. Ichabod. Kabod is the Hebrew word for glory, but Ik is the negation of it. So Ichabod means no glory of God. That was the name of one of Eli's sons. Samuel, you'll remember, because I trust in the Lord. He's in charge of the Israelite nation in times of turmoil that would follow. If you continue to read through this book, you'll see that. However, due to the faith of his mother, by the way, her prayers did not end. We'll see that continuing to happen. She continues to pray for her son. As he goes further and further in his walk with the Lord, she continues to pray. Continues to pray. God continues to do amazing things. The legacy is set. If you were to jump forward to chapter 7 of this book, 1 Samuel, you see that God granted the Israelite nation a tremendous victory over the Philistines. The reason why that happened, because Samuel was a priest, and he led them in the attacks. Samuel also was fervent in prayers. You know, the praying mother will raise up praying kids. It may not happen right away, but I bet you Monday, when I was doing the funeral, my mother had a moment in that funeral where she thought to herself, all those days praying over him in that bed, they were not in vain. She had that moment. And that's not to lift me up, because I didn't do anything. But she thought to herself, I'll bet you, it was worth every prayer. When they get to Beth Kar, Samuel leaves an altar that he calls Ebenezer. Ebenezer simply means, thus far the Lord has helped. And boy, did he. One of the earliest and the most outstanding intellectuals and leaders and defenders of the Christian faith was a guy named Augustine. Some of you will know his book, Confessions of Augustine, or Confessions of St. Augustine. I'm certain that you read it at Baptist College of Florida at some point in time. It's one of the most famous autobiographies ever written. Young Augustine was a hedonist, a philosopher, and a Gnostic. He was a rebel, but his mother, Monica, she was the opposite. A very godly woman. She was persistent and resourceful in her walk with the Lord. Augustine often laughed at his mother's pious ways, mocked her faith, and deliberately defied her, continually pleading for him to repent of his pagan lifestyle, to convert to Christ, and to live an exemplary life. When Augustine wanted to leave the shores of Carthage, North Africa, for the bright lights of Rome, his mother feared for the worst for her son, dreaded the outcome of his leaving, often fled to the church for solace, prayer, and advice. In her despair, she would often weep uncontrollably for her son. One day, a minister noticed her painful cries and asked her why she was so bitter. She told him of her wayward son, but the bishop assured her with these words, "Go in peace, as you live. It cannot be that the son of these tears should perish." Augustine avoided his mother as much as possible and ignored her warnings time and again, but he could not escape her continuous prayers. Monica painstakingly prayed, wept, and looked for her son for more than 30 years until Augustine surrendered his life to Christ. I just want to challenge you with this, mothers, as you go home today to be with your families. Nothing you do this moment is going to fix whatever you're going through in life. This is really for all of us, men, too. But it can begin the course for which God will use to see your troubles through. If that be the case, and you want to leave a legacy, a mighty legacy for God, as a mother, do so in prayer over your children. That doesn't mean forgoing all the other stuff, discipline and all those things, but it just means that at the core of who you are in Christ should be a person steeped in prayer for their family. That's what I know of my mother. Not to say my family's great. We have dysfunction just like everyone else. But what I know is this. When the world is after me, and I feel like that anyway, I always know there's one person praying for me. And it really does seem to help an awful lot. I'm going to ask you to stand. I'm going to ask our worship team to come forward and lead us in time of commitment. And Pat, the others will come lead us. I just want to give you an opportunity today to come forward if you need to make any commitments that you might need to make. Maybe you just need to want to come forward and you just want to recommit to praying for your family. Maybe there's something else going on and you just need to come talk to someone. Whatever the case, as they lead us in a time of commitment, you come if you need to. Maybe this is going to be your church. You just want to make that official today. You just want to say, God, I want to make this my church home. I really don't know all the things that may be going on, but what I do know is this. God is at work. Don't be holding back because of what you think you want. Let God move you.